So good evening, First Baptist Church family, and welcome to Tuesday's spiritual reflection on the book of Micah, even though it's what, Monday? It's Monday at 7:30. We are at the Strawser house at 416 Elm, and the reason why we're coming to you early this week is because I have a prayer engagement tomorrow, and so I will not be able to be live on Facebook, although you are welcome to interact in the comment section below, and surely at some point during the day I will be able to respond with to any prayer request or any thing that you might have. As you know, I'm not flying solo. My dear precious significant other Chasity is here as we will discuss Micah 4 together. Usually I'm by myself, and if you'll recall, if you watch me weekly, you'll know that I'm traveling Koby, and so I was all over the church. I was in the chapel, I was in the sanctuary, and so traveling Koby continues here at the Strawser household. So let's look at Micah 4. We will be reading from the Message version, as I do every week. This version is free on the Bible app, so I encourage you to download it. So we'll be reading from the same version. Just remember, it's so important to know what's happening behind the text. So Micah was an 8th century prophet around the time of Amos. Unlike Amos, though, Micah did not leave the southern kingdom to go preach judgment to the northern kingdom. Micah lived in the southern kingdom, and he preached judgment to the people in the south. And he pointed up north, and he said, just as our friends and neighbors up north were taken to Assyrian captivity because of the way that they lived, you as well will be taken into captivity. And the captivity that they would be taken into eventually in the 500s was Babylonian captivity. So he is having to speak a harsh word to his friends and neighbors. Could you imagine living beside your friends and neighbors and speaking a harsh word of truth? It would be easier to go speak that harsh word and then go back home. But he's right there in the midst of them. So Micah chapter 4. Sweetheart, will you start in verse 1?
When all is said and done, God's temple on the mountains, firmly fixed, will dominate all mountains, towering above surrounding hills. People will stream to it, and many nations set out for it, saying, "Come, let's climb God's mountain. Let's go to the temple of Jacob's God. He will teach us how to live. We'll know how to live God's way. True teaching will issue from Zion, God's revelation from Jerusalem. He'll establish justice in rebel of nations and settle disputes in faraway places. They'll trade in their swords for shovels, their spears for rakes and hoes. Nations will quit fighting each other, quit learning how to kill one another. Each man will sit under his own shade tree. Each woman in safety will tend her own garden." Go ahead.
You want me to go? The baton has been passed. God of the angel armies says so, and he means what he says. Meanwhile, all the other people will live however they wish, picking and choosing their gods, but we will live honoring God, and we're loyal to our God forever and ever. On that day, God says, I will round up all the hurt and the homeless, everyone I've bruised and banished. I will transform the battered into a company of the elite. I will make a strong nation out of the long lost, a showcase exhibit of God's rule in action as I rule from Zion from here to eternity. And you stragglers around Jerusalem, eking out a living in shanty towns. The glory that once was will be again. Jerusalem's daughter will be the kingdom center. So why the doomsday hysterics? Why still have a king? You still have a king, don't you? But maybe he's not doing his job. And you're panicked like woman in labor. Well, go ahead, twist and scream, daughter Jerusalem. You are like a woman in childbirth. You will soon be out of the city on your way and camping in the open country. And then you'll arrive in Babylon. What you lost in Jerusalem, you will be found in Babylon. God will give you your new life again. He'll redeem you from your enemies. But for now, they're ganged up against you. Many godless people saying, kick her while she's down, violate her. We want to see Zion grovel in the dirt. These blasphemers have no idea what God is thinking and doing in this. They don't know that this is the making of God's people, that they are wheat being threshed, gold being refined. On your feet, daughter of Zion. Be threshed of chaff by refined of dross. I'm remaking you into a people invincible, into God's juggernaut to crush the godless peoples. You'll bring their plunder as holy offerings to God, their wealth to the master of the earth. I believe this is the first time in this short book that we've actually been given some good news. This has been a book of despair, because once again, Micah is speaking to his own brothers and sisters, and he's saying destruction is sure to come your way because of the way you've been treating others and because you have given yourselves to other gods. So it's a book of despair. And yet we find ourselves in Micah 4, and there's a sliver of good news to be found. He seems to be saying that when all is said and done, when God is set to return and establish his kingdom on earth, that there will be a remnant. We see this throughout the minor prophets, this remnant theology. When all appears to be lost, there will be a remnant. There will be a small group of people who will survive because they have been living in the ways of God. So there's always, in the back of the prophet's mind, there's always a reason to be hopeful. Jerusalem will stand. But what catches my attention is at the very end, when we're told that through all of this persecution that they will certain to encounter, that they don't know this is the making of God's people, Micah says, that they're wheat being threshed, gold being refined. And so Micah seems to be saying that even in the midst of exile and captivity, Babylonian captivity, which is certain to come in a couple of hundred years, that even in the midst of all of that chaos, that God is going to use that to help make them into the people that they can be, and to the people who God wants them to be. So we live up in the mountains in East Tennessee, and in the forest around us, they have what is called prescribed burns, where the Forest Service will burn certain sections of the forest. And sometimes you could be driving down the interstate and you see something on fire, and immediately you think, oh no, the forest is burning, it should not be burning. But those fires are intentionally set. They're set to get rid of all that undergrowth, so it could allow for new growth to come forth. And those fires actually make the forest stronger and more vibrant. Do you think that is, and I'm asking you, sweetheart, and I'm asking you too, if you have an idea, thoughts, put it on the comment section below. But do you think that this is an analogy for what Micah is saying at the end of this chapter, that what the people have to endure in Babylon is sort of a refining fire?
Yeah, I mean, it sometimes it takes being destroyed to be better, and that's hard to hear. I know, I was just listening to you talking. I think
you were enamored by what I have to say.
Yes. Anyway, I was thinking, if we had a prophet here today that was saying, this is what you had to look forward to, this is what's coming, but the silver lining is that God is going to use that for good. I don't know that I would be super excited about that,
We think about difficult seasons we've had to endure.
Yeah.
And I want you to think about that as well, Facebook audience. Those difficult seasons. If you were to go back to those seasons, it would send shivers up your spine. because you didn't want to be there, and you're glad you're through it. But I think for most of us, we can look back through those seasons of chaos, those trying times, and we could say we grew, that God was molding us and shaping us. Not that we want to go back, because there are seasons I don't want to go back to. But I can point at those seasons and say God was at work. I think about, at the very end of Genesis, the Joseph narrative. Sean and I just finished that particular narrative arc on Wednesday nights a couple of weeks ago. And there is, at the end of Genesis, when the biblical writers tell us, when Joseph is speaking to his brothers who sold him into slavery, what God intended for evil, what they intended for evil. See, I have to have my sidekick here. I mean,
I did not go to school for 12 years.
I know. She didn't get her doctorate, and yet she knows this more than I do. But what they intended for evil, God intended for good. And so I see that text in the same vein that I see Micah 4, that it was sort of a refining fire for Joseph. That Joseph, even though he may not want to return back to that difficult season, he can point back and say, but God was at work, and I was shaped and molded. Just as God was at work through Babylonian captivity, and God has been at work through those difficult seasons, those seasons of refining fire. Any other thoughts on that particular portion of the text?
I was just reading here, and it says, these blasphemers have no idea what God is thinking and doing in this. Gosh, that's so true. I mean, we don't have any idea what God is thinking or what he's doing behind the scenes when we're going through those difficult moments. And it's really hard. And we just want him to take us out of it. And that's what we pray for. Just get me out on the other side. And like you said, looking back months or even years later, there was a lot of refining going on.
This is a word of hope. And I would imagine that when the people from Jerusalem were in Babylonian captivity, mid-500s, they would have known this text. And I think they would have clung to this text, particularly to Micah 4, because, there are just so many wonderful words of hope. You will soon be out of the city, on your way, camping in the open country. God will give you new life. He'll redeem you from your enemies. And so that as they're in that difficult season, in the back of their minds, they can hear Micah preaching these words of hope. And I hope that you find these words to be hopeful as well. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to start a new sermon series on 1 Thessalonians. And 1 Thessalonians, Paul's earliest letter, was a word of hope to a congregation that was dealing with persecution and conflict. And so I've already titled my sermon series title, Hope in a Hostile World. And so we're going to spend 4 weeks together looking at the ways in which Paul is telling this young fledgling congregation there's reason to be hopeful in the midst of chaos. And so the reason why I'm preaching this text or this series is because we are in the midst of a hostile world as we're dealing not only with COVID, we're dealing with racial strife, we're dealing with political tensions. And that will only be exacerbated as we get closer and closer to the election in November. So we're people of despair right now, and we are looking for hope when there appears to be no hope. And so be looking forward to that sermon series. But I hope that just as Micah 4, I think, gave the people in captivity hope, I hope that this gives you hope as well. God will give you new life again. God is always in the process of doing something new and taking something that is broken and beaten and creating it into something beautiful. Even taking a situation like captivity, like COVID that we're in the midst in right now, and God uses that as a refining fire. So I hope that this is a word of good news in the midst of this very difficult book. It's a book of judgment. It's a book of despair. There is hope right in the middle to be found. Do you have anything else to say?
No.
Good
job.
I mean, you were just so, like I said earlier, she's so enamored, she's speechless, like some of you are on Sunday mornings. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us for this time of spiritual reflection. Hopefully, I'll be on next Tuesday morning live at 10:30 if I don't have a scheduling conflict. And maybe if she is still at home and not working, we hope she's going to be working, she'll join me for this time of spiritual reflection. But thanks for joining us.